Thank you very much. I'm going to speak today with Bernard O'Farrell and Rachel Hewitson, two of our industry partners, and I have to say thank you very much for being here this morning. They have been absolutely invaluable in helping me design the curriculum and the assessment for the programme to ensure that it meets industry standards and to make sure that our graduates are prepared to work in industry. So thank you very much for everything. So, I'm Elaine Walsh, I'm an assistant professor. I teach technical communication and instructional design at UL. I have over 20 years experience in managing and delivering online distance education programs. So this is my natural environment. I really do enjoy teaching students, and I completely understand what it's like to be working and studying at the same time. I also studied while working full-time, so I understand the challenges and the accommodations that need to be made for people who are working and studying. And I do see it as and I'm very proud of the fact that my students manage to achieve their goals and that I can facilitate that in some way. So I am Course Director for the Professional Diploma in Digital Content Development, and we focus on professional writing, information design, workplace communication and learning design. And Anne mentioned that we have micro-credentials, so if you're interested in dipping your toe into the programme to see what it's like, the professional writing module and the learning design module are micro-creds, so you're more than welcome to try out those modules. That's my contact details. If you have any questions, please contact me. I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you. We can arrange to have a chat. So elaine.walsh@ul.ie. So, why is communication important in the workplace? Well, according to Lannan and Gorak, whatever your job description, expect to be evaluated at least in part on your communication skills. And surveys over the past 30-40 years have shown that employers want employees to have effective communication skills. Whether we like it or not, first impressions count, and that comes through in your communication style as well. So even when it comes down to simple things like typos or using an incorrect word, that you might do without realizing it, it does have an impact on people's perception of you. So it can reduce your credibility. And that can lead into people then thinking that, well, the quality of your work maybe is questionable. So it is important to ensure that you are an effective communicator. It can also cause confusion. There's nothing worse than having a bit of a panic because you think you're after miscommunicating something. It could result in missed deadlines or people not being sure what they're supposed to do, so people not completing tasks as expected. It can result in financial losses for your company. It could be something to do with loss of sales or people using your product and due to a poor user experience sending the product back. And it can influence you as a person in your job opportunities. So when you're going for promotion or maybe moving to a different role, poor communication can actually impact your chances of getting the job. Good news, it's not all bad news. Good news is that we can learn to be a better communicator, and that's what we're trying to do on this professional diploma. I'm going to pass over to Bernard O'Farrell. So Bernard, thank you very much for being here this morning. And Bernard's going to talk a little bit more about the skills that you need to be an effective communicator.
So thanks, Elaine. My name is Bernard O'Farrell. I'm Director of Content and Creative at Longboat by Advara. I've been working in content development for over 10 years. I started as a radio journalist, reading the news on radio, and then I moved into the e-learning industry in 2014. I'm a graduate of UL. I graduated from the Masters in Technical Communication and E-learning in 2014, and most recently I've been working with Elaine and Rachel and Martin and colleagues in UL on the Diploma in Digital Content Development, and giving some industry input on the kind of things that, as an employer, that I think should be on the course and that will help the students. At Advara, we work in clinical trials. Clinical trials is where drugs and new therapies are tested before they can be given to the general public. They're very complex. There's lots of regulations and standards and compliance and ethics that has to be followed. And what Advara does is it helps the stakeholders in clinical trials to manage them successfully. There's lots of ways they do that, but in the area I'm involved is in training and information. So my teams would create training resources for doctors and nurses who are working on the trials, but it would also create information resources for the participants who are taking part. Our Irish HQ is literally just across the road, behind the Spar over in Castletroy, and it's great having UL on our doorstep. We've hired a number of graduates from UL over the years, and we found they've always been ready to hit the ground running, and you know, things like this just help build that relationship, and we're looking forward to developing on that in the years to come. So I'm just going to touch on a few points here where communication in the workplace is important. In truth, you could write a whole book about each of these, but I'm just going to give you a point or two for consideration under each, and then some advice that you could perhaps bring into your own roles. The first I've put up is client success, and I've deliberately put this first because it's so important to Advara. Our clients run clinical trials, and if they're successful, it means that the clinical trial is running well, and then you'd hope that there's better outcomes for the patients who are taking part. So it's a real value that we have, that the success of our clients is integral to the way we do business. The final product you create for a client is obviously very important. So, you know, what they see in the end, it's really important that you focus on that. But something that you also need to consider is the customer experience throughout the project, throughout the journey from kickoff to the end. And you should really focus on having a customer service mindset throughout any time you communicate with your client. It's not just emails and meetings and face-to-face calls. Anytime you send information out to a client, you should look at that as a communication, and you should apply the same standards that you apply to your emails and your face-to-face meetings to those communications. I've put some examples on screen of the type of information that you'd be working on, and the likes of proposals, presentations, content outlines, timelines, wireframes. And I can guarantee pretty much all of you at some time in your career have worked on one of these types of components. And my point here is that you don't need to be a content developer or an instructional designer to be expected in your roles to work on information. Content is all around us. And if you find that in your role that you're doing these kind of things, creating this type of information, and maybe it's a struggle for you or you're unsure of how best to do it, the diploma is exactly the type of role for you, because you can learn the type of principles that go into creating information like that. So just a few tips then on effective client communication. First is to develop your skills in information design. So again, that's about just learning how to format the different information you send out to your clients. Identify the right resources to help on board and support your client throughout the project. So sometimes you might have a very simple task for a client that you need to show them how to do it, and that might just be a one-page document, it's enough. There's other times it may have to be a 20-minute video or a demo where you need to really show them a complex task that you're completing. So you need to learn how to identify the type of communication you're going to use to get the point across to the client. So that's something that is covered in the diploma. Learn to ask the right questions so that you can understand client expectations. There is interview techniques. There's ways to prepare for interviews with clients and to get the information you need. Be clear and concise in your language, so avoid vagueness or room for interpretation. You don't want a client reading an email and being unsure and having to go back to you again to get the meaning of it. Back and forth takes the client off the work they want to do. And in truth, most of the time, if they're your client, they have other stuff that's more pressing for them, and as their vendor, they just want you to give them the information they need to make the right decisions. And then the final thing is to share your own knowledge in an easy to understand way. As a client, you're being paid to give your expertise to the client. So there's times where they might have an idea and you think there's a better way to do it, and it's important that you communicate that, but you do it in a respectful way, and you explain the reasons behind why something should be done in an alternative way. The next one is team collaboration. The point I want to get across here with teams is that teams have their own nuances, and the type of team you're working with can change the type of communication you're using. So in my experience, you'll have project teams and then you'll have department teams. So your project team is where you'll be working with a range of different disciplines in your company, perhaps even your client or external contractors, whatever it is, and you're working on a project deliverable. And then your department team is where, or it could be your group team or your division team, that's where if I'm a QCS in a company, it's the other QCSs in that company as well. They're your department team, and you have your project team. And I found that the type of communication you use for both of those teams is completely different. Your project team, you're working on a deliverable, so it's much more immediate. You're having scrums to do actions. action items, you're having daily stand-ups, you're checking in on statuses all of the time. It's much more regular communication, and sometimes you'll be in touch multiple times a day because you're getting towards that goal of having your project completed. With your department team, it's not as fast-paced. It might be where you're having meetings perhaps once or twice a week, once or even every 2 weeks. And there it's more like a forum where you're sharing knowledge, you're troubleshooting together, and you're helping each other out on the different projects you're working on. Of course, there's exceptions where you know there are pressurized times when you're working with your teammates, but it's important just to have that understanding of working with teams. There's different types of teams, and one approach doesn't work for all. Just want to give you some examples of meetings or issue types and the type of communication you could use. So if you have non-essential issues, like day-to-day discussions, that's something like an IM system. It's kind of like an internal text messaging. You can use something like that. If it's essential, so like scrums, project-related team meetings, or even team conflicts, you should really get into a virtual meeting day or in person. I'm sure you've all been on those emails where there's threads and everybody's back and forth and nobody's getting to the point. So better off getting together on a call and sorting that out. And then if it's an urgent issue again, or something that's unforeseen, again, it's better off picking up the phone. There's times you see these long emails coming in where someone spent half an hour or an hour phrasing this email trying to explain the problem, where if they just picked up the phone, in 5 minutes it could have been sorted and everybody would know what they're working on. So again, some tips for effective team collaboration is to identify the correct platform for your meeting or issue type. That's what I was saying about sometimes it's virtual, sometimes it's over the phone. Maintain meeting minutes, really important. I know meeting minutes are a bit of a pain, nobody likes doing them, but it can be really helpful to get a project across the line, especially if you structure them well. Use the correct tone in all your communication formats. So it's like my point on the left there, you have to understand that your team members, they've other projects, they've other deadlines, and they've their own lives outside of work. Maybe somebody has a kid who's homesick from school and they're trying to do that and everything else. And the last thing they need is you coming in with exclamation marks and caps asking where everything is or whatever it is. So, just think about your tone, who you're talking to, what's their situation. Please and thank you goes a long way as well. Ask questions and listen to your team members. It's like with the client, but it's worth emphasizing that sometimes people will go into scrums and they'll ask the questions, but they're not actually listening to the answers, and they're not, interpreting what your teammate is saying and how that will actually impact on the project. So it's good to just listen to your teammates and take in what they're saying. Set clear milestones that are easy to understand and accessible to all. And accessible, I don't just mean that they're easy to find in a folder, I mean that they're easy to read and understand. You don't want a spreadsheet where there's just dates everywhere and different headings and there's stuff being deleted and track changes or whatever. You want a clean document where everybody can see the milestones that they're working towards and the dates that they have to meet. And then something that ties in directly with the course is, if you're a good team player, you will help your teammates. And part of that is, what I find in developing efficiencies in your team is to create templates, reusable assets, training guides, product overviews. All of those resources will help your teammates to onboard quickly, and it will get a consistency in the work across the board. So, you could go in, whatever role you're in, it doesn't have to be in information design, it could be anything. Your team will need some kind of onboarding resources and training and standards to work off. So again, by doing the diploma, it can give you a hand in developing those types of documents and making them effective for your teammates. Working with SMEs, which is something I do every day in clinical trials. For this, it's much like teams, where it depends really on your relationship with the SME. It can vary based on their location, so if they're in person or remote. So again, the type of meeting you'll have, whether they're internal or external. So if it's an internal SME, they're your colleagues. They're people you probably have lunch with. You probably have a pint with them at the weekend. I've had many friends who are SMEs along the way, or there could be external, where they're maybe a client SME or a contractor. And an internal, if you're a colleague, or if they're external, the relationship is completely different. So you'll interact in different ways. The timelines matter. So if you've a project and you've a 24-hour turnaround, you might only get one call with your SME and that's it. Whereas if you've got a month or two to work on a project, you obviously can structure out your communications a bit better. You can have different types of meetings and find something that works for you. Complexity and scale is also important, so if a task is pretty straightforward or you're experienced in it, you may not need the SME's help at all, you're happy to do it yourself. But obviously if it's more complex and there's a lot of, in my case, clinical language or complexities in your protocol, you may need to have far more interactions with the SME. So I suppose my point here is that it does vary with SMEs. It's not just one set way of dealing with SME. You have to factor in a number of considerations. So some tips for working with SMEs is to prepare for your meetings with SMEs, be clear on what you want to get out of it. And that's my criteria for that would be is, what do I need to know to advance this project? I don't want to be stuck as a bottleneck where I can't go any further without the SME's input. So the questions I'll come up with are, what do I need to know so that I can keep the project moving and get what I need done in this phase? Take notes, it's really important, but you know, one convenience in these in the times we're in is that people are comfortable with, you know, your Zoom calls and whatever, so it's common to record meetings, and that's really helpful in the more technical meetings. Open questions encourage full answers. Try not to ask just yes/no questions, because that's all you'll get. Whereas if you ask more open-ended questions, you'll get more full answers. If time permits, ask additional questions to help develop your own understanding of a subject. This is something, especially with internal SMEs, you know, like I said, to your colleagues, people are usually happy to share their experience and help you out. So if you do a 15 or 20 minutes, talk to the SME, ask them questions that you need to answer to develop your own understanding of a topic. Because for the next project, you won't have to ask those questions. And again, it just improves the efficiency as you go. This is really important, good file management. The amount of times you work on a file and you send it to this SME and they're like, oh wait, you didn't put in that change I requested, or you added in too much, or you put it in a typo. The SME sends it back, you send it back again, and maybe the SME sends you back the file again and they put in the wrong version of the document. And suddenly you have a whole morning gone working on changing the sentence. And it's so easy how it happens because people are called into meetings or whatever else. So practice good file management. Before you send something to another, be it an SME or a client or even another member of your team, just read over the file, make sure it's clean and it's everything that the SME needs. And also it's good at times to remember that you're the SME also at points. So there's times when people will come to you for help, and that's where, again, you've got to be receptive to that and provide the information in as clear a way as possible when you can. For writing standards, this is quite a broad one. You know, to be a good writer, it doesn't mean we all have to be William Shakespeare. It's about, even if writing is something you struggle with, there's principles you can follow that can improve your communications. And the big one, and I think if you take anything from my slides, is that to understand the audience that you're communicating with. An example I could give you, and it's something we deal with, is let's say we had to create a one-page document on the symptoms of cold and flu, and you had to do two versions. One version is for a 6-year-old child and the other version is for a 40-year-old adult. And in your head, you know they're two completely different products. What you present for the child will have imagery, it'll have more colours, the layout will be different, the typography will be different, the volume of content will be different. And what you're doing there subconsciously is you're tailoring it for your audience. And I know it's a bit of a black and white example, but it should still carry into your work. So if you're a software engineer, you have a new release and you're explaining it to your commercial team doesn't understand JavaScript. They don't know what you're talking about. So you have to tailor down your language and make it understandable to who you're talking to. And that really applies across the board, where you're dealing with clients, SMEs, team members, whatever it is. Think about who you're talking to. They may not know as much as you do about a subject, or they may be unsure about things. So you just have to bear that in mind in your communications. So some of the questions you should ask is, who's the recipient? What do they know about the subject? Other topics to consider there is their age, their ethnicity, have they any kind of disabilities? All of that matters. Where are they located? So again, do they speak English, or is there another language that they speak? How will the content be presented? So content comes in many forms. So are you writing content for a website? Is it going to be a video? Is it going to be a PDF brochure? There's so many types of content you could develop. And then what's the recipient's motivations for accessing the content? Again, that's something to consider, as in, why are they reading this content? Is it because they're well informed on a subject and they're happy to just start reading a big blob of information? Or maybe you're trying to sell something, or they're reluctantly having to read this information. Something we deal with quite a lot is that we work on clinical trials where someone has been recently diagnosed with a condition. Sometimes it's a completely life-changing condition, and we create information resources for those people. So you have to really be careful about your tone, your use of language, your imagery, everything for those people, and be empathetic to their situation. And just some tips for writing standards is, as I said, to tailor your writing to your audience. Be careful when using abbreviations, jargon, colloquialisms. Like I said, it's fine if you know the person's an expert in the subject, but if they don't really know or they don't know enough about the subject as you, just think about that. They might not know what certain acronyms or terms mean. Use active sentence, which means to clearly identify who will complete an action. So this is a good one from meeting minutes, and you see it sometimes where somebody says, thanks for the call, those documents will be delivered end of the week. And that's a pretty good way of making sure those documents aren't going to be delivered, because you haven't specified who's going to do it, where you're better off saying, Bernard will deliver those documents by the end of the week. So now I know I'm going to deliver them, and it will get out the door. Think about your layout, typography, how it will improve a reader's understanding. So, nobody wants to read one big long page of text. It doesn't work. You separate it with paragraphs, with headings, with italics, with colours, whatever it is. That's an important thing to consider. Use your company style guide if available. There's no need to stress over creating PowerPoints or whatever it is, when a lot of companies at this stage do have branding guidelines and templates there that you can use, so it'll take the stress out of that. Proofread your content for clear meaning, grammar, punctuation, typos. It's what Elaine was talking about before. That really adds some credibility to your work. If somebody sees a typo in the first page, whatever it is, it just doesn't look good. Meaning is really important as well, especially when you're dealing with clients and your team members. Double check that there's no kind of double meanings in what you're saying, and that no room for interpretation. And also consider any localization requirements. So a good example that our localization team gives us is that, let's say if I say, once I finish this presentation, I'm going to have a coffee, and I have to translate that into Spanish. Once could also mean once, twice, thrice. So for the localization vendor, they're like, what's once mean? Whereas if I say, after I have this presentation, I'm going to have a coffee, after only has one meaning. So those words, there's certain words that are suitable for localization, and there's other ones that aren't. And that's a whole thesis in itself, localization considerations, but it's just a good example to consider. And just lastly on this, on new technologies, what I want to say on this is that every company has their own needs for communication technology. So some use Gmail, some use Outlook, some use Zoom, whatever it may be. So I don't think anybody really needs to be an expert in any particular one, because you're going to probably use all of them at some point, depending on who's set up the meeting. And what's good with the diploma is that you will be exposed to some of those technologies and working with teams using the different types of software. Some technologies are well established in companies, others are emerging, like artificial intelligence. So that's something we're of course looking at as well, about how can we use it as a tool to assist our teams. And it's important to develop an understanding of how your teams communicate and work together, even your processes, the way you develop the product, because once you understand how your teams work, then you can identify bottlenecks and potentially where technologies can come in to help you out.
So, speaking to you here today from SAP, a brief introduction about myself. I have actually this month I'm with SAP for 25 years. All of those have been in what we call user assistance. I've had different roles within user assistance, and basically that's roles around translation and technical writing. So I started myself as a translator back in '98 in SAP in Germany, and I moved on to a tech writing role, and then I came home to SAP in Galway as the manager of a team of technical writers. And I was in that role for about 18 years. About 12 months ago I decided time for a change, so I took a sideways step in my career, and now I focus on analytics and how we can use analytics to measure the effectiveness of the content that we produce. So still within user assistance, but a different role again. So for today, I just wanted to start by showing you a little bit about the type of organization that SAP is, because it gives meaning to the points that I'm going to be making later about what it means in our organization to communicate effectively. So I don't know if you've heard of SAP. We're a large global enterprise software provider, and we have small and medium-sized customers, but also very large organizations, and they use SAP software to run their business processes and to solve complex business challenges. And our purpose as an organization is to help the world run better and improve people's lives, which sounds kind of lofty, but actually even every single technical writer at SAP, when they come in and do their day's work creating content, it's front and fore in their minds. How can I help improve the lives of the users that are going to be reading my documentation? How can I make it as easy as possible for them to do their work? So that's our purpose. In terms of our customers, of the 100 largest customers in the world, 99 run SAP software. Of the 100 greenest companies in the world, 97 run SAP software, and we touch 87% of global commerce, of total global commerce. So the greenest companies, sustainability is something I'm going to mention later as well, and it's close to our hearts. In terms of internally as an organization, we have over 100,000 employees globally. Just over a third are in research and development. Lots of locations around the globe and 157 nationalities. So again, we'll be looking at the translation, and Bernard also mentioned the huge topic of localization, all play a part as well. Headquarters are in SAP, in Walldorf in Germany. Okay, so diving a bit deeper into user assistance at SAP. So that's, like I said, an umbrella term really for translation and technical writing. We have 1,200 writers and translators who work in our content management system. And translation and localization is a huge part of that. So we translate not every part of our documentation into all languages. We do it on a kind of our customer base, you know, who needs what languages for what product. But generally, for the help content that we write in our help portal, we're translating it into up to 50 languages. And for the UI, for the text that appears on the user interface of the software, that can be translated in up to 80 languages. So lots of translation going on there, 10 billion translated words per year. And again, how we write our content, how we communicate has an impact on that. We publish our content in what we call SAP Help Portal, and we get around over 20 million unique visitors to that portal every year. So that's our target audience, which we'll delve into a little bit deeper. Okay. So our main deliverables, it's the joy of having such a large number of products that we write for, and it's also our challenge. So we create lots of different types of content, and Bernard mentioned the importance of the target audience, and that is so important at SAP as well, because we're essentially putting out the same kind of information on the same products into all of these different channels and all of these different formats. We really need to have the target audience front and fore when we're writing. It could be the text that we're putting on the UI. Perhaps there's a new feature in the software that you need to document. You're going to be writing maybe a how-to document, quite formal, using your templates, publishing it in SAP. But you're also going to be maybe publishing a blog about that new feature on the SAP community. So it's the same kind of content, but in a blog format. And they have to be written in quite different ways. So having the target audience front and fore in your mind is really important. So these are just an overview of the tools and the resources that we have. I mentioned the content management system that we have. That's a data-based content management system, Ixia. and lots of other tools that we use on a day-to-day basis to produce the content in all of those different formats that we saw on the previous slide. So the well-known guidance when you're creating content, to write as little as possible and as much as necessary is never truer than in an organization like SAP. We're very conscious of the fact that the content that we create has to address our own organization's total cost of ownership, as we call it, and that also of our customers. So when we're writing, we should have an eye all the time on keeping costs down for ourselves as an organization and also for our customers. So that's what we're calling total cost of ownership, or you might also have heard it referred to as TCO. And the more effectively we can write using all of these tools and using all of these the style guides that we have in-house, we can always have that focus on lowering TCO. And some concrete examples of how can I lower TCO, and I was so pleased to hear Elaine and Bernard talking about, you know, the real basics of communicating effectively. It's whatever you're writing in whatever format for whichever of those channels, anything that you write should be clear and concise, speaking to the target audience, and then correct grammar and spelling and punctuation. So it really is the basics that we need to have front and fore. And if we're writing in that way, communicating effectively in that way, we're giving exactly what the customer needs in terms of the content. And we spoke about improving their lives. If they're using our software to run their business process, they come up against an issue, they need to reach out to the help, they find what they're looking for, and they can get on with their day-to-day work. That's obviously the best outcome. If that doesn't happen, if we're not communicating effectively, maybe they can't find the content, maybe they find the document, but it's too hard to search through the structure to find what they're looking for. We're slowing them down because of the structure we've put in. Or if they get stuck, they're going to need to reach out and create a support ticket. And that goes into our support engineer structure. And a lot of time and money has to be spent then on sorting out the problem. So that's a cost that we can avoid, making our content more effective, reducing the number of support tickets that customers have to log, and then reducing the overall TCO as well. We saw the 10 billion translated words per year. Again, I've spoken about the number of languages that the content we create is translated into. It's translated primarily in English, sometimes in German, and then from there it's translated into other languages. We have secondary languages, so it goes from English or German into a set of languages, but then maybe there's a kind of a third level language which might have come out of one of the translations. So not everybody translates out of the English or German source text. So all the more important that when we're writing, we're doing it clearly, concisely, it's easy to translate. We're using, we're as much as is necessary and as little as possible, so that we're not inflating with lots of words, because we're paying for not all of this translation. I mean, it's machine translation is a part of it, but certainly for a lot of the translation, we're paying per word. So again, another way in which we can reduce total cost of ownership. We spoke about sustainability as well earlier. Lots of the greenest companies in the world use SAP software. We have our own focus on sustainability, and we produce software to allow our customers also to manage their sustainability. And when it comes to content, again, we're coming back to as much as necessary, as little as possible, because everything we produce has a carbon footprint. It has to be stored. So if we're only producing the correct amount and not any more, we can also reduce storage costs. Plus, each documentation type has its own carbon footprint. We're trying to keep an eye on that internally as well, striking the balance between providing the information that the customer needs in the format that best suits them. Is it a video? Is it an interactive graphic? Is it text? But also having an eye on what that means from the carbon footprint and sustainability perspective. Videos are obviously very heavy on storage, and so trying to strike that balance and find that sweet spot is also something we try to achieve. Again, under the umbrella of reducing total cost of ownership. And then the last point in TCO that I wanted to mention is the whole element of reuse. So it's not, so that's the idea of perhaps one technical writer writing a paragraph that covers the information needed for a new feature. And then if that feature's integrated into a separate product, the tech writer in the other product doesn't need to rewrite it. They can simply take that block of text and reuse it into there. And so our DITA CMS facilitates that reuse. And obviously reuse is great because then the original block of text only needs to be written once, translated once, and then can be simply reused. So that's another thing we try to do. It's not as easy as you might think when you're using it for a different purpose, that tiny tweaks might need to be made, but as far as possible we do try to reuse as well, again keeping the eye on the total cost of ownerships. So they were the main points that I wanted to say around the importance of writing clearly, concisely, attention to detail, communicating effectively for all of those benefits that I mentioned. The trending topics at SAP as well are the whole idea of user experience and design, so writing on the interface. I mean, ideally, a software product will be so clear and concise on the interface and so easy to use and so intuitive, you're not even going to need the documentation. That's the holy grail we're looking for all of the time. And so all of the better the UI can be and the better the design and the UX can be on that, the better. AI is obviously also a big topic, we're using that, or we're experimenting with that as an organization anyway. There's a new digital assistant coming out called Joule, but within user assistance as well, we're looking at AI to see how it can support us in our day-to-day jobs. It's never going to replace us. It's going to be an aid, I think, making our work quicker and easier, and then freeing the tech writers up to focus on other things like quality and research and development into other different formats and all of those innovative things that you'd like to have time to focus on more, but don't have the time a lot. So prompt engineering and conversation design are an important part of that as well. So our tech writers, our user assistance developers in SAP are also spending some time on those skills, learning them and applying them. Okay. So that's all I wanted to say. So thanks very much again for SAP. The content of this professional diploma is paramount. We're delighted that it's available, and we're delighted that we've had an opportunity to contribute as well. So thank you. Well, I suppose the first thing is that internally within SAP we have our own instance of the large language models, because we need to be able to train them so that we can ensure that there isn't any garbage in there in the first place. That would be the ideal. So we work with our own instances, plus we have the issue that if we're using the public versions and we're asking questions about content that hasn't been published yet, or features, software features that might not be available yet, then we're putting information out into the public domain too early. So we use our own instances of the large language models, train them appropriately, and then we look at things like, and this is not my specialist area now, but hallucinations and temperatures. So if we ask it a question and it doesn't know the answer, we don't want it to make one up, or we don't want it to kind of get creative about it. We want it to say, sorry, I don't know. So if it starts making things up that aren't true, that's hallucinating. And also we can kind of set the temperature. So if the temperature is 0, then the creativity aspect is cut out as well. So so we can kind of manage the situation using those approaches. If that answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you're working on, like I'm in a very production-led environment where you have timelines, and I think in that framework you have to have clear processes and communication as part of that. So you have to have set structures of how you communicate, because you don't want somebody sending someone a message on Slack or internal messaging, which is very important, and somebody could easily miss that. So the informal communications, like I said, are more for your day-to-day discussions where you're just talking about a project, but there's nothing really urgent or relying on it. Of course, you still have your informal communications. You can call someone and see how they're doing or whatever it is. We don't have the canteen anymore as it is. You know, we have especially most of our staff is remote, so we have to organise get-togethers and whatever it is. So, of course, it's still good for people to call each other and catch up. But when it comes to our projects, yeah, I think there is that framework of communication and how the teams operate, because we're working across multiple teams, multiple projects. So we have to have a standard that everybody works off, because you know you've new staff who'll jump in at a project if somebody's on annual leave or whatever it is. So you just have to have those structures that are consistent for everybody to work off. So.
Well, after 25 years, there's quite a few things. Well, on a personal level, it's the opportunity to work with such a wide variety of people, different generations, different locations, different cultures. Pretty much all of the work we do is virtual. So we have people dialing into one meeting from lots of different locations. I work with quite a few people who started also 25 years ago, so I really like the fact that there's such continuity there, and you're you know, a great stability, I suppose, in the organisation. And just learning. I mean, we've seen with the new technologies, at every single day you come in, there's something new to learn. There's plenty of opportunities to learn. It's encouraged that you learn and experiment, fail, you know, fail early, fail often, that agile adage. And yeah, just that whole environment of learning and sharing knowledge and collaborating to get something done. Because it's so huge that no one person knows everything, so you absolutely have to work with people, and just the general environment is one very much of collaboration, and we're in this together, let's solve it together.